Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from. You are welcome on Mamlakak Broadcast Network TV, affectionately called MBNK News, a platform designed to contrast the worldly fact with the kingdom through the original. I am Veronique Lawson, your host for this interview today with distinguished and renowned podcaster SG ANON from the QNews Patriots. Our war, indeed, is in significant geopolitical, economic, and ideological shift and must need a transformation. As we understand that this battle is to eradicate all evil from our around the world, and we are privileged to witness this victory. History book should be written by we the people. Today, we have the honor and privilege to sit down on this part two interview or sort of question and answer today with our only SGN, a renowned podcaster sought after in the Twitter community for his intensive research on the operation that we call the Global Great Awakening. I will not give him the stage without emphasize that SG is mentioned alongside individuals like Derek Johnson, Mike King, 107, and Dylan Monroe, the creator of the Q map. They are recognized for their effort in organizing and explaining research in a comprehensive manner. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome SG ANON, the legend behind the QNews Patriot on the stage. Thank you, SG, for coming.
Thank you for having me back, Veronique. It's good to come back and be here.
Thank you very much. We are so privileged indeed because we have attempted many times to have this interview, but I know that today is going to be good. And as I said, we're going to move on more on the Q&A session based on various feedback we have had from the previous show with you. So if you were ready, I will just be asking you the first question. I know that some of them may be question that you already did with on your podcast. I remember one of them lately that I watched, which you were really going in detail on those questions. But for the sake of the audience, because they have requested that, we say, okay, we have to still ask SG on that. The first one will be, how far are we gone with the operation? Sort of, are we closer to the end or are we in the middle? Thank you.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I'd like to clarify for the audience out there that when we talk about timelines and timeframes, I think we the people have a much more conventional or a much more linear understanding of how time moves forward here in the world, right? We have 24 hours a day. We have about half of that daytime, half of that nighttime. So there's this natural tendency to progress in a sequential linear fashion, one to the next, A to B to C. That's not how irregular warfare and espionage military campaigns at high levels really actually work. You're not talking about timeframes. You're talking about events. You're not talking about dates. You're talking about windows of opportunity, not even necessarily windows of time. Sometimes those windows of opportunity vary in their length of time. There are different points along the way where the opportunities can vary between a day or two or a week or two. And so when we look at what we're doing here in the world, fundamentally, we have pushed the ball so far forward up the field, to use the terminology. We've gone all the way from the one goal on the one side of the field to the middle, and now we're moving from the middle, or have been over the last couple of years, from the middle towards the opposite goal on the other side. And we have opportunities and moments where we can jump in and really progress forward. A soccer runner, for example, or a football runner for most of the world out there, can cover the distance across the entirety of the field in a very rapid amount of time when there are no obstacles. But when there are obstacles being applied at different points throughout that particular journey, that transition from one side of the field to the other, it may take seconds or it might take minutes. So when we look at what we're doing out there in the world, that's where we're at right now. We're across that halfway point. We crossed that halfway point during the Biden-Manchurian years between 2021 and 2025. Now we are having the momentum with us, and we're moving forward towards the opposite goalpost, which represents victory for we the people. And I believe we're moving actually in a relatively rapid pace right now. I don't believe that we're being mired down too much with obstacles, despite what we would have much of the mainstream and even much of the alternative media talking about with respect to the judicial insurrection inside the United States, the various bureaucratic and magistrate level insurrective actions undertaken by Western Europe and Western European nations and former Commonwealth realms. I don't view these fundamentally as obstacles. I view them as opportunities. And so we are accelerating the pace of the mass consciousness awareness, which means we're generating more momentum on behalf of we the people to have a restored balance of power in the world. And on top of that, while most of the world is distracted, mired down in those issues, do we have these obstacles? Do we not have these obstacles? You have President Trump going overseas and meeting with individuals like Mohammed bin Salman. He's the first U.S. sitting president to visit the Qatar. He's the first U.S. sitting president to visit the United Arab Emirates. And what he has essentially done is he has redefined more than a half century of warped brainwashing ideology from the American political pulpit towards regional power players in the Middle East just in a matter of a few days. So this is an incredible period of time where we're living, and we're moving ahead very, very rapidly. But I would caution patriots on getting too caught up in the timelines, right? We're seeing benefits, but we're also seeing some drawbacks. We're seeing advances down the field, but we're also seeing some pushback, and we have to look for where we are advancing quickly, rapidly, and efficiently, and that's where we derive our encouragement from.
Beautifully said. Wow. Thank you very much, SJ, for that answer. Beautifully said. You frame it very well. You said that we don't need to be caught up in the timeline. And I really like that, because people need to understand, as you said, there's a lot of obstacle, but we don't look at the obstacle, we look at the opportunity, and then we are advancing very, very incredibly. Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer and in depth. Now we're going to move to the next one, which it says that what does the death of Pope Francis imply for the people? Can you please expound on the number 88 of his year and Klaus Schwab's of the World Economic Forum stepping down at the same age? I remember that you have already done something like that. I don't know whether 6 months ago you spoke about, actually, you were the first person I know that you spoke about the Pope is going to be die at the age of 88. I watched that show. Please explain again for the sake of our audience. Thank you very much, Ashley.
Well, I want to clarify for your audience out there that I'm not, a clairvoyant or a soothsayer of any kind. These types of things are reasoned out. And when we look at what the Vatican itself represents, right, there's multiple layers to the papal control of spirituality in the Western world. There's multiple layers to the Vatican's control going all of the way back to the days of the Roman Empire. And it's worth keeping in mind that the Roman Empire essentially reinvented itself into the Catholic Church, overtaking the early church and turning the church into a large extension of both faith, but also military and governmental form. So when we look at what the period of time that we're living in right now fundamentally represents, it represents a rebellion and a revolution a breaking away from that particular control matrix, just as much as it represents a breaking away from the financial control matrix, or from the judicial control matrix, or from the Federal Reserve conspiracy matrix that underpins a lot of that financial machination, right? So the Vatican itself, we now have the death of Pope Francis. Pope Francis was the Vatican's CEO. This is an individual who's basically the president of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is as much a government body at the very top as it is a spiritual body. It's just as much a financial body as it is a spiritual body. And so we had control vested through the papal, the authority invested in the Pope, and through the School of the Cardinals. I think it's the College of Cardinals is what they call it, that immediately underpins the Pope, that a lot of that authority to get into areas like the Vatican ledger books, for example, or the Vatican archives or the Vatican libraries, much of that, still shielded based on who occupies that pulpit. And so now we have the Pope passing away in his 88th year. 88 is a symbol for new beginnings. It's been taken in spiritual schools for many thousands of years to mean reset, to mean rejuvenation. The permanent and eternal state of change is described with the number 88. So, and of course, in Western cultures, we have the movie Back to the Future, which was sort of a cult classic, where you would hit 88 miles per hour inside that particular, movie plot, inside that fictitious plot, right? And you would end up in an area that was not along the same timeline, even though you're in the same geographic context, sort of like the reality around you had flipped. So when you look at the suppression that has come out of the Vatican Church and the emanation of concentrated power that has come out of Rome over the last 1,000 to 2,000 years, including everything from financial to spirituality to the literature that actually made it out into the holy books, things that have been stored away. There's many rumors out there. So far, none of them corroborated, but they make a great deal of sense to suggest that the Vatican Library archives beneath the Vatican itself in Italy contain much of the records that were heisted from the Library of Alexandria before that library was burned down. So if we run for a moment with that, and again, that's a speculation that's not been corroborated, but it makes a great deal of sense in some regards. If we run for a little bit of that, and we can conclude this in other ways also, the Vatican has been almost single-handedly responsible for robbing the spiritual identity, eating out the substance, really, of the spiritual identity of we the people in the Western world during its reign as a pseudo-government form over these last couple of millennia or so. So now we have, again, the death of that figurehead of that particular entity at age 88. We have that within just, I think, hours of Klaus Schwab, another individual who has suppressed technology, who has suppressed invention, who has suppressed economy, and assisted in the complete redefinition of entire international commerce markets over the last 20 to 30 years. This individual suddenly retiring from the forum that he has chaired and hosted for a very long time, also at age 88. We have indications, I think, Veronique, to show that, again, we the people are moving that awareness and that awakening forward in all of the major and important arenas of our society. We cannot achieve a free, fair, just, transparent, and properly balanced society if we have all of the areas except for money figured out, or if we have all of the areas except for spirituality, or except for business or government. All of them have to come together in a commonality of understanding and a common backdrop theme reflecting the will of the people at all levels and humanity's highest good, or none of this works.
Wow. Wow. Spirituality and money at the same time. Gone. I like that. I like that. Thank you. Thank you very much, SG. Beautiful. The third question which was asked is Kazakhstan. Seems to be much on a spotlight. That was in the beginning of the month of May. This day, exposing 50 billions of the US taxpayer money they receive. Who was behind Anthony Blinken? Any thought on that? That was another question we received.
Well, I had not heard the specific instance that you're referencing, but the broader question about the forces behind Tony Blinken ties back almost in a redundant way, in a repetitive way to what I was just talking about a moment ago. The same factional underpinnings that have driven pulpits of power inside spirituality, inside finance, inside business for a very long time are also the same entities, and in many cases the same circles, that have tie-overs into government officials or government pulpits or bribery schemes or money laundering operations that entrap what you would consider good-willed, well-intended individuals inside of Western world political systems who are, quite frankly, just naive and a little bit green to the game, and they find themselves caught up in situations that they can no longer get out of. And so Tony Blinken is a good example of someone that had intimate knowledge of some of those operations, was aware of how the money laundering and the human trafficking components intersected with the geopolitical and foreign policy pulpits of the United States, was aware of how the State Department was able to utilize its vast power around the world to influence embassies on the ground, to then take those embassies concentrated in various countries and influence their judicial, prosecutorial, and government processes. That is how nation crafting works. And Anthony Blinken is just another example, just the latest in a long line of foreign-oriented diplomats inside the United States whose agenda actually lies with a concentrated group of power brokers, at the very top of high finance and what we would call sort of like high elitist or philanthropic society in the world, who have had their aims on world domination since at least the 1950s.
Wow. Amazing. 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 There's a rapid change indeed in our world. We have two other set of questions from. Thank you. sorry. Thank you very much, Ezzy. The next two set of questions are from a medical professional. She said, as a health professional, I have found that study done in herbs, plants, and natural resources in NIH, as well as PubMed.gov, are so conflicting. Meanwhile, they are proven to work. Why such?
Well, I want to make sure that I understand the question. Why is there such a conflict in the research behind that topic? The reason comes back to the control of money, power, and finance. And now we're talking about not necessarily large-scale philanthropic transnational entities like the Gates Foundation, although that is certainly involved in financing the high-impact journals, which govern a lot of what is accepted practices inside of academia and especially medical academia. But we're also talking about vested financial interest inside the United States of America. If you're a pharmaceutical company and you have a new drug, for example, it's in your vested interest to ensure that you have academic studies and literature that supports your drug rather than disproves it. It's also in your best interest, if you can, to leverage control through advertiser and donation and grant money and things of that nature to try and influence other studies that may have been at one point in time independent in their origin to come about and produce a result that is actually more in line with demonizing something that goes against your drug or that perhaps does the same thing as your drug. The reason we come back to this in a big way is because of the patent situation inside the United States and the Western world. You cannot patent a naturally occurring substance, and almost all pharmaceuticals, as a matter of fact, 99.45% of them are completely derived from natural sources, but they've been lab adjusted or lab synthesized, or they've had a bioengineered component added or removed, and that constitutes enough of a change from what nature actually gives us right from the earth and right from our water, right from our air. It constitutes enough of a change for them to be able to patent that as their own invention. So what you have going on inside of medical academia and medical practica around the United States of America, especially in the USA, but really in the entirety of the Western world Commonwealth realms, is you have this financial vested interest co-opting that has occurred with respect to the actual academic literature, the rigor and the study, how things are actually determined, how things are fleshed out. And the good news with that is you have so many parties at any given time that are undertaking academic studies or research projects or research design proposals towards a specific aim that the beast system itself is not able to get all of them. The academic high-impact journals are not able to filter out and titrate every single thing that comes through in a lens that is supportive of that modern medical model and that modern business model that exists inside political pulpits and financial pulpits in the Western world. What happens is you end up with a constellation of studies that come into the broad literature that make it through the sieve, so to speak. And many of those studies actually support and highlight the truth of things because you do have some, not many, but some independent academicians out there. The main compromise vector has been large-scale, high-profile institutions, universities, medical colleges, research institutes, things like that nature, which are then bolstered and bulwarked by those high-impact journals that are bought off by the same corporate interests that I was just referring to a moment ago. But the beauty, again, of that system is you have so much attention on it at any given point in time coming from so many different angles that they're just not able to sieve out and filter out every single thing that goes against the approved narrative.
Wow. Wow. Thank you very much, Ezzy. Do you believe that we will be able one day really to bring back the natural way or the organic way, or they say like the neopathic back to in the system? Do you believe that maybe one day we could get that? Because I remember before Rockefeller took up the big pharma, that was the practice in America.
I absolutely think that we will get back to it, and I will go so far as to say that it will not take us very long. When we talk about the issue of health and wellness, vitality, vigor, and the substance of life as it pertains to medicine and anatomy, right? When we talk about that area, that what was formerly the discipline of healing the woes of the body, the mind, and the spirit, we're talking about practices that are informed by multiple thousands of years of wisdom, in many cases, literature and firsthand sources. And in a lot of situations, you've got sort of this trial by experimentation, for lack of a better term, over that same period of time that has yielded the body of knowledge that we have today. And the Rockefellers worked overtime throughout the 20th century here in the USA, especially, to completely destroy and discredit and decimate, a multi-thousand-year-old ancient school of understanding behind how we as human beings utilize the earth in its natural and pure form to symbiotically live here in harmony with it, right? It helps to heal us. We heal it with the work of our hands. It provides us oxygen. We provide it carbon dioxide, and on the cycle goes. And the Rockefellers were very successful at that for a very long time throughout the 20th century. But again, this comes back to the Achilles heel of all evil. Nothing evil can start fundamentally at an origin point of being evil. It has to invert something that is already good, wonderful, and holy, put here by the living God. And that's exactly what modern allopathic medicine had to do. And so throughout the 20th century, even as they demonized every alternative treatment protocol and pathway and understanding that it was, prior common knowledge before the 20th century, they were caught up in the greed and the wheel and chain of their pharmaceutical industrial complex, which relied on nature to provide the raw material, which then they could adjust in that patent protected process that I highlighted a moment ago for purposes of enriching themselves and enslaving and poisoning the population. So in essence, you cannot take away the knowledge, you cannot take away the reality, you cannot erase what God has put here in the world. And it only takes humanity rediscovering that at a mass civilization level scale all at one time to reinvert and reorient that entire system back to what it always was for many thousands of years. And I don't think it's going to take us very long to do it, because we're living through that period of time right now.
Beautiful. So much. Wow, I could not even agree. I can't agree more with you on that. You really nailed it right there. We, the people, need to force that one back into the system, truly. Thank you very much. The same person also asked the question, what is the role of World Health Association in all health-related charts, pandemics, and more? And what roles does Bill Gates playing in all this, specifically with vaccines, COVID, and population control? And also, she asks whether is it a Gates 2.0? Thank you very much.
It's very interesting. I guess the last part of that question, I'm going to answer it like this. In India, they have a mortality record of Bill and Melinda Gates from 2013. And apparently in those records, Indian authorities intercepted the philanthropic couple, put them on trial for mass murder, and executed them because of vaccine studies that were being conducted with no informed consent or not even a notice given to inhabitants of several Indian villages that were at the time experiencing a pretty significant cholera outbreak. So, you can take that for what you will. Those records have never been fully confirmed or publicly affirmed by the Indian government. Again, they exist on the internet coming out of that area of the world. But provided that there is not a 2.0, and say for a moment that that isn't true, the former part of the question is really the meat here. And I think that's with respect to how does the worldwide corporate tyranny actually function as a unified, cohesive system. And the way it happens is through philanthropic individuals that have extremely large amounts, we're talking tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, underneath their own private control, vested in their own foundation or networks of foundations, which then tie back through donor involvement to individual entities like the UN or various sub-factions of the UN, like the World Health Organization, the WEF, and other things of that ilk, USAID and others. So understanding then that you have primarily a combination of official governmental political actors fomenting government policy at the hands of a philanthropic cartel at the very top, masquerading as the United Nations itself, alongside a very active, subservient, philanthropical private stakeholder class that functions almost as a peer or as the puppet masters with the strings over that political machine that I described a moment ago. You have a blending of public and private jurisdiction and public and private space that has come together at the highest levels of high society, government finance, international politics, things of that nature, and has decided that national sovereignty, national identity, pride in one's land, pride in one's peoples, pride in a fair and balanced system. They've decided, just as as sort of self-appointed of themselves, that those situations are not the way that they want to proceed forward in the world. Oh, and by the way, we're going to kill about 90% of humanity in the process, just so that we'll never be challenged in the future. That is essentially what has happened here, and you'll have to, forgive my somewhat brash painting of that picture, but that is, again, it's the actual machination, the methods by which we've seen our entire national sovereignty systems in all of our countries, Canada, the United States, the UK, Ireland, all of the Western European countries, most of the global South. All of us have seen our sovereignty and our liberty either eroded or outright evaporated as a result of that corporate tyranny that represents that blending of those two arenas.
It's very true, very true, very true. And I do believe that it's about time for the people to have a real revolution. Thank you very much, SG. Thank you. Did you believe most of the chaos happening in USA as well as around the world is intentionally orchestrated by the elite? Someone is asking. Illuminatis and even the government to keep people preoccupied and distracted while they are doing their evil thing on the other hand?
Well, so the question itself is going to be a little bit of a longer-winded answer. And the reason for that is because of that espionage warfare situation that exists at these high levels of society that we've been talking about over the last 15 to 20 minutes. We're absolutely seeing resistant and rebellious factions that are left over from the deep state apparatus. And when I say left over, I mean not interdicted by the first Trump administration in various operations that happened between 2017 and 2021. We're absolutely seeing them highlighted and activated out there in the world. As a matter of fact, we have President Trump, other individuals in the orbit of President Trump, certainly Crown Prince bin Salman, certainly the Emir of Qatar, all applying highly targeted, irregular warfare style political pressure to individuals and pulpits around the world that are going to be resistant to the overall aims of balancing this planet, removing the infiltration inside of our societies and achieving a free and balanced and just and fair interactive arrangement with one another. At the same time that we're seeing these activations occurring, you are also seeing the needle move forward in significant ways with military operations and civilian law enforcement operations that are nabbing enormous swaths of this large black market criminal syndicate complex that exists across a multi-continental domain and fighting space and has for a very long time. So we can look at things like Operation Restore Justice, Operation Cross Country. These are things from the FBI that have been undertaken in recent years, targeting hundreds and hundreds of pedophiles. In 2022, we saw an interagency task force cooperative arrangement between the FBI, the Australian Federal Police, and the authorities, the federal police authorities out of Greece. And I forget the direct name of the organization, but all three of them coordinated a sting that brought down more than 400 child predators all at the same time on two separate continents. These types of operations are ongoing. They're occurring under the guise of that surface chaos that your questioner and your listener was talking about a moment ago. And you also have militarized operations that are still happening. We have Operation Blackwater Shield, which is going on in the Caribbean Basin right now. And the U.S. Marine Corps has been in Barbados, which is a heavy trafficking corridor utilized by a number of different front companies that have been highlighted as relevant to Operation Blackwater Shield just a couple of months ago. So, looking at this landscape that's playing out, yes, do we have chaos? Do we have tension? Do we have difficulty in the main space? Of course we do. Is there discontent on the side of those that are still brainwashed and pearl clutching the narrative that they've been fed most of their life? Absolutely there is. But what's happening on the other side of that coin is real actionable movement, a complete revaluation, a quote, total reset, end quote, coming from President Trump with respect to how China and the U.S. conduct relations with one another. That's moving ahead far far and away. We're seeing the United States lifting sanctions on the new Syrian government. The guy that is currently in charge of the Syrian government is a former ISIS captain, and you have to consider that infiltration works both and all different directions based on the survivalist components of operators around the world. So again, a fluid situation, event-driven, not timeline, and not one that we can judge conventionally, because there is more to be gained here by tantalizing, prosperity and success and expansion rather than continuing the status quo, except for those individuals who have a zero-sum game target on their back, like James Comey, for example, to cite a very recent example of something out there in the public fore that represents fundamentally a desperation maneuver. We're seeing those resistant forces attempting to derail and remove our progress, obstruct our progress in those other arenas. So this is an incredible multi-level reality period that everyone is living in. And you say that to most people and they look at you like you have 5 separate heads on top of your shoulders. How can you possibly believe that we're living in a construct within a construct? But that is in fact how we're proceeding forward in the world. And it is by that arrangement that we are changing and reorienting the world for the better.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much, SG. Indeed, we are truly, despite all those resistance and all, we are winning, and we are winning big. Just as President Trump said, he said, we are winning. We can't stop winning. We are winning and winning big. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have 3 last questions, but I am going to try to defer one. The 2 one is going to be more on finance part, but before the 2 one, this person is saying during the last episode, you explained that USA is not really a republic, but is incorporated. What about USA territory like Puerto Rico? What role did Puerto Rico is playing at this stage?
Well, the U.S. protectorate territories of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Guam are subsidiary corporations of the broader U.S. Inc., and they report in SEC filings, which you can find online each year. But what that allows for is, again, that blending of jurisdictions. If you're under straight U.S. corporation jurisdiction, that means you're underneath the statutes, the U.S. codes that exist here on the mainland inside the United States. But if you are a protectorate, you have certain protections of U.S. law, but there are certain codes and customs that do not apply to you as a part of that sort of semi-autonomous arrangement. But it allows for the corporate jurisdictional masters in the background who can go back and forth between the public-facing business space and the private break room, and that's how you have to think of this at the international nation-state level. It allows for them to go and put things inside that private break room that the general population inside the corporation's lobby out front is not going to be subject to and is not going to fully understand, but will still end up being subject to nonetheless. So looking at what's happened here with Puerto Rico, I think is going to tie back to the Internal Revenue Service. The initial charter of the Internal Revenue Service is actually domiciled to Puerto Rico as a Puerto Rican corporation entity. The hidden trust, I believe it's trust number 62 for the United States of America Treasury, that was absorbed by the IRS in 1913. And actually represents a great deal of the sovereign wealth of the American citizens, is domiciled and hidden through bureaucratic and administrative regulations and shielding means under Puerto Rico jurisdiction. So all of these things are going to have to come forward eventually as we reshape the public-facing government itself. President Trump has talked multiple times about, purging and revamping the entirety of the IRS. He's called it an external revenue service rather than an internal revenue service. We know that there's been a tremendous amount of buy-offs and layoffs that have occurred inside that particular agency. Most of them were buyouts at I think an 8-month period of a severance on the other side, so they could get out of government and go apply those skills somewhere else out there in the broad workforce. But fundamentally, what is that preparing us for? I think that's preparing us for the absorption of the External Revenue Service collection conduit into the Treasury as a subdivision directly of Treasury and not as its own autonomous entity, because the United States of America Treasury is not domiciled offshore. And so we have to bring the U.S. corporation's financial assets back onshore here in the United States of America before we can blend those two on the balance sheet and push that out to the American people.
Wow. Awesome. That's awesome. That's very good news. Good news in the short term. We'll be having it correctly quickly. Thank you very much, SD. Now we're going to move to the last two questions, which is more on financials part. Someone say, I heard few Christians talking about the war wealth transfer, the decrease of the value of US dollar and the reevaluation of the Iraqi dinars. Is it true or is it a myth?
Well,
Thank you.
That's a very good question. It's an interesting and a fascinating question. I think what we need to back up here and start with our conceptual understanding is based on what is happening on the ground inside Iraq and especially inside the government in Baghdad over the last 24 months. Can we reasonably say that there is never going to be a time when the US dollar and the Iraqi dinar exchange rate revalues at the international world stage? And I think the answer to that question is no. When we look at what's going on with Iraq, Iraq is reforging and refiring a multi-hundred-year-old, very vibrant economy, excuse me, that at one point in time was the primary ballast, the primary bulwark against the expansionist activities of intelligence community-controlled Tehran. And that goes all the way back to the Iran-Contra days of the 70s and the 80s. So when you look at what's happening right now, we had the Iraq War. We saw the complete subjugation and decimation of that independent country. We saw the toppling of the Hussein government, the Saddam Hussein government, and the complete removal of all resource control and financial control away from the Iraqi government and from the Iraqi people and placed squarely under the jurisdiction and on the paper balance sheet of the Federal Reserve Bank of Washington, D.C. So when you look at what's happening now, we've seen that disconnection process that has occurred. It occurred actually a couple of years ago. In 2024, Iraq stopped exchanging dinars stopped exchanging in-country currencies for anything other than the dinar. In other words, they were not giving out U.S. dollars if someone came from, Switzerland or France or Spain and had currency native to their country. They would try and exchange it in Iraq for a long time, and you could get U.S. dollars or dinars or several other denominations. And in 2024, that completely went away. Additionally, we've seen a very dogged effort inside the Iraqi parliament to put together a scaffolding by which they, as a country, will value their resource holdings and their overall resource landscape going forward for purposes of admission long-term into the World Trade Organization. So, and the IMF has already approved a tremendous amount of funding, I think to the tune of $60 million or $600 million inside Iraq for purposes of expanding their infrastructural capacity and actually achieving the momentum inside their country to participate in the ongoing machinations of international world commerce. So when you look at that happening, when you look at the Iraqi Central Bank announcing that they've put together a committee about 8 months ago to assess the validity and the feasibility of revaluing the dinar for purposes of internal economy inside the domestic landscape, I think all of this points to an inevitable revaluation and a readmission of that country to favored or partially favored trade status at the international level. And that will require their currency and their resource base to revalue relative to everything that has happened since 2003, and most notably the US dollar.
Indeed. There's been a lot. There's been a lot of controversy about the U.S. dollar and the Iraqi dinar, and also that wealth transfer. People are really, they think that they're going to receive it maybe like last year, but it's still purporting. But I believe that we are on the good way. Thank you very much, SG, for that. Our last question to you today is that can you please explain the benefit tariffs we have for USA as well as for other countries? Thank you.
I do apologize, Veronique. I had an audio interruption and I only heard the very last part of your question. Do you mind to repeat that, please?
Okay, sorry. The last question we received was, can you please explain the benefit tariffs we'll have for USA as well as for other countries? Thank you.
Well, I think the benefits that we're going to see collectively as a civilization, to include, that demographic and all demographics, is a reorientation of our spiritual understanding of how we relate to one another. And that really is the longest term benefit. It outpaces any financial benefit, any capitalistic benefit, any return of wealth, any return of power. All of those are fantastic to have here in the world, and we have to have those. I don't want to dismiss any of that in terms of importance. But overall, this process is yielding a completely new understanding of who we are in relationship to one another and who we are in relationship to the almighty living God of the heavens. And that particular dynamic is the most important lesson to take away from all of this. It will govern our behavior with one another for the next 800 to 1,000 years, in my opinion. We are photonic electrical beings. We're tied symbiotically to this wonderful earth by way of that electromagnetic field that the earth generates for us. It's a high-flying, high-vibration resonance field. People call it the Schumann resonance. It amplifies every good and decent part of our own spiritual electroconductivity, which emanates from various energy centers that we have in the body, which themselves are the intersections between us and the Holy Spirit of God himself. He sustains us quite literally in every single breath. It's why we say his name every time we breathe in and breathe out. So understanding then that dimension of the human being is not only real, but is discernible in some fashion, and also is present within all of us, and also allows us to achieve really our highest expanded state with one another. That is the overall benefit here that we're going to take away and move into the future. It's going to redefine political relationships and discourse. It's going to redefine what it means to enter into the covenant of marriage with one another. It's going to redefine what it means to teach our children and raise them up in the way that they should go, so that when they're older, they won't depart from it, so that they will continue to teach the mysteries of the human being and the mysteries of our spirituality and our relationship with the divine that have been hidden from us for over 3,000 years just in its current form. We are magnificent and fearfully created beings, and they are desperately afraid of us. It's one of the reasons that the greediest forces known to man have spent trillions of dollars of our money in efforts to try and shut down our spiritual anatomy, right? These are the same forces that would never give up one red cent under any other circumstances or conditions. But when it comes to our ability to interface with what the Holy Spirit really wants for this world and to progress God's will forward for the earth, that is something that they are desperately attempting for thousands of years to control, and they have never succeeded.
Oh my gosh. SG, my. That final answer you said is just a blowout. Wow. The
I have
Schumann
to say,
resonance.
Veronique, this particular topic is one that's deeply passionate to me. My personal awakening process about 15 years ago now was tied to the understanding that our spirituality was being shut down and weaponized against us by virtue of the things that we were consuming, which I could only describe to you really as demonic. And when you look at what's happening out there in the world, people are understanding for the first time in broad unison with one another across international boundary lines that we are fundamentally the same. We have different skin colors, different cultures, different ideologies, but with the exception of a very small percentage of extreme fringe opinions, which themselves will filter themselves out of the broad human consciousness anyway as we go forward. We're understanding that we're one humanity in service of the living God and placed here with one another to right this boat and fix that apparatus that has been destroying our spirituality for hundreds of years. Nothing, in my opinion, is more important than that.
Very so. Wow. Just like Christ said, you will do this. Don't marvel at what I'm doing, because you will do it even greater word than this. Wow. And we were always asking ourselves, but why are we not doing it? And I love the fact that you brought it out. SG, you don't know how you bless my heart with that, with your final segment of this show today. Oh my God. It's beautiful. We really need to be awakened on that. And I don't know whether you will have a time one day to come and just share with us on that spirituality part, the Schumann resonance, and say how we connected to the consciousness of Christ in a way that the church have never taught the people.
It would be an honor, Veronique. This is an
Wow.
incredible topic, and it's I think a great topic to leave the audience with. We are made in the image and likeness. The book is literal. We are the extension of God here in the world. But if we don't step into our power as the regents of this planet, someone else will sit upon that throne for us. And that's exactly what has happened.
Wow. It's so true. I mean, it's just peace me inside the truth that you just shared. Oh my gosh. If we could be awakened to that, the world would be that better place that we dream, each one of us. Thank you. Thank you very much, SG. Oh my gosh. You are
Thank you for
such a
having me.
blessing. You are such a blessing, really. Thank you. Wow. This wrap our show today, truly. Do you have any final remark on that? But I mean, that on that note, that would be the best. I don't even want to add anything. That conclude the show.
I think that should be the final remark for today, Veronique. And I have to say, as we go forward here, we have to fall back on that truth. We're moving things ahead. But things happen not only in a physical timeline, but they're also happening on a spiritual timeline that God really, for most intents and purposes, is in control of. And how quickly we move through that timeline is going to be partially based on what he wants for us, and also partially based on how quickly we accept who we are and link up with him in the proper way.
Wow. Thank you. That's all what we have today for you. Thank you. Follow us on our various platforms. My goodness. We are everywhere, as you see. We are almost in every social media, and not only in America, but in 5 continents now. Thank you. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, SG. It has been my honor to host this show today. And I'm truly blessed with your delivery. And please give my regard to your family. Thank you. And we sign off. Bye-bye.
Okay.